This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. You might not know their names, but brothers Charles and David Koch have quietly given more than $100 million to right-wing causes, underwriting a huge network of foundations, think tanks, and political groups. Jane Mayer reports on the Koch brothers in the current edition of The New Yorker in an article titled Covert Operations, the Billionaire Brothers Who Are Waging a War Against Obama. She says the Koch brothers have become the primary underwriters of hardline libertarian politics in America, and their views dovetail with their corporate interests. Charles, who is 74, and David, who is 70, own virtually all of Koch Industries, a conglomerate whose annual revenues are estimated to be $100 billion. The Kochs operate oil refineries in several states and control some 4,000 miles of pipelines. Koch Industries owns Brawny paper towels, Dixie cups, Georgia Pacific Lumber, Stainmaster carpet, and Lycra, and is ranked by Forbes as the second largest private company in the country after Cargill. Just to clarify, Koch is spelled K-O-C-H. Jane Mayer is a staff writer for The New Yorker. She writes about politics and the war on terror. Jane Mayer, welcome back to Fresh Air. Now, you say that by giving money to fund political groups like Tea Party protesters, they've helped turn their private agenda into a mass movement. So before we get to who they've given money to, what do you consider to be the Koch brothers' private agenda?
Well, they are longtime, very hard-line libertarians. So their private agenda is really the eradication of the federal government in almost all of its forms other than the parts of it that protect personal rights. They have been working to fight the federal government really since the 1970s, and their father was doing it before they were. So they're trying to get rid of federal regulations, particularly on energy companies like their own. They particularly have been at war with environmental regulations, and they have a history of serious and even criminal pollution problems. And they're very anti-tax in almost every form.
Now, you describe the Koch brothers as waging a war against President Obama. What are some of the things that they've funded in opposition to the Obama administration?
Well, they have funded various kinds of front groups and organizations that have come at Obama from many directions at once, which is kind of what got me interested in the story, because if you kind of pick up the rocks and take a look at what's under them, so often you find roots, financial roots that go back to the Koch brothers. And I'm talking about in particularly opposition to Obama's health care policy, opposition to Obama's environmental policies, energy policies, tax policies, the stimulus program. You name it, they are against it. And you can pretty much find money coming through their family foundations I counted just recently 34 different organizations that have been involved in policy and politics, mostly in opposition to Obama.
Now, you give an example in your New Yorker article of a July 4th summit, a Tea Party summit that was funded by Americans for Prosperity in Texas. It was called Texas Defending the American Dream. And you say an ad cast the event as a populist uprising against vested corporate power. And it said, today the voices of average Americans are being drowned out by lobbyists and special interests, but you can do something about it. And there was no mention anywhere of the special interest, huge corporate power that was helping to fund this Tea Party summit. Why does Americans for Prosperity not mention anywhere that you could find that, David Koch, who is a billionaire and owns all these corporate interests, is behind it, even though they're saying it's an anti-corporate group?
Well, it is an irony, and the thing is that you would really have to ask them why they want to obscure their hand in this. And I did try to ask them, but one of their characteristics is that they are really press shy and underground, and particularly when it comes to describing their political activities. So they wouldn't answer any questions about it.
What other aspects of the Tea Party movement have the Koch brothers funded?
It's interesting. They were involved almost from the start of the Tea Party movement, and they put up websites that helped organize rallies. They helped pay for buses that got people to the rallies. They've provided various kinds of sort of political infrastructure that has made the movement possible. kind of fanned the insurrection in various ways. But the other thing that's interesting to me is that they've tried to channel the very legitimate and genuine anger that's out there in the country about economic problems and push it in towards their own agenda. It's not that they were the very creators of this anger. It's more that they've tried to take the anger and model it. And I've got a quote in the story from someone named Bruce Bartlett, who is a Republican and conservative historian and economist who actually worked for one of the Koch organizations. And he explains that for years they've been trying to turn their politics of kind of libertarianism into a mass movement. And the Tea Party is what provided the sort of the troops out on the street for them to do that.
So how does the Tea Party meet the Koch brothers' agenda?
Well, it provides bodies on the street. It provides ideological, voice to an agenda that they've got. Basically, if you take the example of the Texas branch of Americans for Prosperity, because I went down to Austin to see it, what they are doing is training angry people in issues that they care about. They are trying to get people to fight regulations, fight energy reform, fight environmental reform, and they also provide education about who those angry people should target in the way of candidates and politicians, and how they should do it. They even provide scripts. They've handed out talking points for the Tea Party.
Do you think that most of the people who see themselves as members of the Tea Party don't know about the corporate money behind it, don't know, for instance, that the Koch brothers are supporting a lot of the Tea Party activities?
I just don't know.
By supporting, I mean funding, yeah.
It's hard to tell. I mean, when I was down in the Austin convention talking to Tea Party people, there were a lot of people who had conspiracy theories about money flowing into American politics. But, ironically, none of the people that I interviewed seemed to be focused on the Koch brothers. They were kind of obsessed with the possible role played by George Soros in particular. So I didn't find anyone who seemed focused on the Koch's role.
You actually talked to one of Soros' spokespeople and asked them for their take on this, because, Soros is seen as like the great funder of liberal causes. And you quote a spokesperson as saying that Soros' funding is transparent. He doesn't secretly, covertly fund things, and also none of his contributions are in the service of his own economic interests.
And that was Michael Vachon who said that. And I can see out there on the internet blogs that this is it had become kind of a war between Red America and Blue America about which billionaire creates more trouble in American politics. And in some ways I sort of think of it as choose your poison. The point is not to say that not to defend George Soros. It's to question really the role of these huge fortunes in flooding money into American politics. And I actually wrote a very tough piece about George Soros for the New Yorker magazine also. So it's not that we're championing one over the other necessarily, but I can tell you one thing, which is when I did write about George Soros and the fortune, questioning the amount of money he was putting into politics, there was a big difference between writing about Soros and writing about the Koch brothers. George Soros spent days talking to me and let me watch his operation pretty closely. And he puts out a lot of information about where his money is going. By contrast, the Koch family refused to answer even the most fundamental question about their activities. They are, as I quote somebody saying who worked for them, they are not just under the radar, they are underground. And you cannot get this information out of them. So they prefer to be a much more closeted political force.
Thus, your article is headlined Covert Operations. Any idea why they're so covert?
Well, I think that again, I'm going on the interviews that I did with people who worked with them to get some insight. And one of them told me something I thought was interesting, which was that they prize their privacy. Remember, again, this is a privately owned company, partly because they want to avoid the scrutiny of possible congressional investigations into their activities. They don't want controversy to be associated with the brands they sell. It might get in the way of their business. And so they don't want people to think when they're picking up Brawny paper towels that, hey, this money is going into attacking Obama, because they don't want that kind of controversy. They'd rather hide behind groups that do their work for them. I have a quote from someone who says they use rednecks to do their dirty work for them, and that was someone who worked for them who said that.